From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Monday, September 29, 2025. A senior award-winning 7 News reporter has been stood down after she initiated a class action against the network for allegedly underpaying staff. It comes amid leadership turmoil, a ratings nosedive, and widespread fears among staff about further cost cutting. Today, what's going on at the legacy broadcaster?
And we are underway. Perfect bounce.
Nearly 4.1 million Australians did something very old-fashioned over the weekend. They flipped on the TV and tuned in to Network 7 to watch live.
Amazing scenes as Brisbane get it done. 47-point victors.
And that made the AFL Grand Final, where Brisbane thrashed the Geelong Cats, the most watched TV event of 2025, even beating July's State of Origin decider in the Rugby League.
What a night this is, what a spectacle.
The death of traditional broadcast television has been grossly exaggerated. It's still kicking, with 1 million viewers each night watching 7 and 9's news bulletins at 6 p.m. But both these storied networks are going through change at a head-spinning pace. 9's lost 2 chairs, a chief executive, a head of news, and an EP of its top-rating current affairs show. 7's gone through a giant reset too, churning through 2 top news bosses, a CEO, and an entire generation of experienced news talent.
We connect people with people across Sydney, across Australia.
And when we do it, none of us are alone.
7 News, connecting you.
And now 7's facing a potentially multi-million-dollar class action lawsuit from its own staff. Steve Jackson edits The Australian's media diary. Steve, what is going on with this lawsuit?
Claire, this has been going on for a couple of months now. We first revealed this back at the start of August, that staff in at 7 had been advised, Fair Work has put up the minimum wage, congratulations, you've got a pay rise. Unfortunately, there's a little bit of bad news with that. We're taking it out of your personal margin. Now, for people on contract at 7, a personal margin is the amount that they get paid over the awarded enterprise agreement salary. So they negotiate it themselves. Hey, I'm on this minimum amount, but I live in Sydney, I live in Melbourne. Here's a top up. And it's quite often called the Melbourne or the Sydney margin. So everyone's gotten a little bit outraged by that. And then they've started having a look around and going, oh, hang on. You're taking out this minimum salary increase, but at the same time, you haven't given me a pay rise in years. So they're complaining that even the most experienced newsroom operatives are quite often on an entry-level journalism grading and making about 55 to 65 grand a year with their personal margin on top. And nowadays, they're doing more work than ever. You know, they're doing 3, 4 live crosses into bulletins. They're starting early. They're finishing late, particularly as newsrooms sort of reduce or retract in commercial television outlets across the country. They're being asked to do more with less and for less money. And it's just created this tinderbox of outrage, and we're seeing it starting to explode with one staff member going, well, hang on, I'm actually going to do something about this. I'm calling in the lawyers. We're starting a class action and we're suing Channel 7.
What do we know about the person who's leading this class action?
So she first raised the issues around the time we found out about it. She went to her bosses and said, look, there are these issues. We haven't been keeping tabs on what hours everyone's working. And I'm actually really concerned that a lot of people basically aren't being paid for what they're doing at the network. That was about 7 weeks ago. She ended up going off on stress leave and she returned to the network last Sunday. She told her bosses, hey, look, I know I was stressed about all this, but I've now passed it off to my lawyers and they're taking on board. I'll let them deal with the nuts and bolts with the bean counters upstairs and I'll just get back to the newsroom and do my job. Unfortunately, that solution hasn't worked for everyone.
It's a bold move for a TV reporter to put their heads up and make a complaint because in television, unlike in newspapers, generally staff are on 2-year contracts. That makes everyone pretty vulnerable, doesn't it?
It's the highs and lows of working in television. You sign that 2-year contract, you're invincible for 12 months, and then the next 12 months, it's that ongoing fear that, hey, my contract's not going to be renewed. And, it creates an ultra-competitive environment, quite often amongst people on the same show where they're competing for the boss's attention rather than worrying about rival networks or rival programs. They're trying to prove that they're better than their own colleagues so that they get their contracts renewed. It's a really, really combative and I would say not ideal situation when people are continually in fear that at the end of their contract, thank you for coming. It's been great having you here for 2 years. No reason that we're not extending it. We're simply not. And we saw that in Nine's cultural review last year, that people were sort of describing the feeling of being on punishment island at these shows. And that's that period when, hey, your contract's up to expire in 6 months. The boss doesn't want to renew it. They don't want to tell you just yet because they want to get that last 6 months out of you. So no one's sort of talking to you. You know that you're about to be voted off punishment island, but there's nothing you can do. And it creates this environment where one of the ways you try to get back in the good books is basically to show that you're better than your colleagues rather than better than your rivals.
The management justification for doing that is that it obviously elicits better performance. Is that true?
Oh, look, it's one of those things. There'd be a lot of journos such as myself who would say that I was always performing better when someone was yelling at me in a newsroom. I definitely worked harder when someone put the fear of God into me. Did it create a more collegiate environment? Is it an acceptable culture of fear these days? I'd say in an era where there's fewer journalism jobs, but there's also fewer top-line candidates, the right approach is to try to hang on to the talented people you have. And nowadays, with competitive environment for candidates, if you put the fear of God into people, they'll just simply leave and go somewhere else.
Now, the journalist who's leading this class action has been stood down. What's Seven's explanation for that?
According to multiple sources in a newsroom, they have told her that they have 3 issues that have raised concern and have cited these as the reasons they've stood her down and excluded her from the newsroom. Apparently, she turned up to her first shift back in more than a month last Sunday, and one of the red flags that management raised with her was that she parked in the wrong parking spot in the work car park. Now, it's a Sunday shift. Colleagues have told me that, the car park's widely empty. She pulled into a car spot, didn't think anything of it, but they've listed that as one of the causes of concern. Another one of the red flags was that she tried to question a colleague about their experiences in the newsroom with doing additional hours and how they'd been paid in what was described as a, quote, interview style, unquote, setting during work hours. Obviously, they're in the newsroom during that Sunday shift, and there is some suggestion she was trying to broach it so she could sign them up to the class action, and that could be the reason it raised some concerns, but that's another one of the red flags. And the third official red flag was that she's been told that she'd been reported for rifling through the Chief of Staff's desk on the news desk. Again, colleagues have told me that's where the rosters were kept, and that she's told other people in the newsroom she was just trying to find out what shift she was doing. And yet this has been raised as a potential mental health concern and a reason to exclude her from the newsroom.
I mean, even if she did have a mental health concern, is that a reason to stand someone down from their job?
Well, yeah. I mean, here's the fact of the matter is she's turned up to work on a Sunday, and get this, on top of all that, one of the other issues they've raised with her is that nobody knew she was coming in and saying, oh, you've unexpectedly turned up for this shift. So it's a Sunday shift. They're not popular to begin with, but I've also seen the roster for that day. She's clearly down as being one of 5 reporters rostered on, so they knew she was coming in. So she's told colleagues in the newsroom, and she sent out an email to everyone in there saying that she fears she's being targeted in retaliation for trying to sign up people to a class action, and they simply don't want her in the newsroom creating trouble and getting more people to sign up.
Coming up, what's fueling all this newsroom drama? Some very stark economics. People love predicting the death of television news, but clearly that's not anywhere close to happening in Australia. 1 million people still tune in every night to watch 7 and 9 News. But what's happening inside 7? They've had a very tumultuous year.
I mean, it's amazing, right? So the numbers don't really lie. It's apples for apples. The same ratings boxes that were recording the numbers 10 years ago are still doing it today. And what we've seen is there's this return to free-to-air television. Arguably, the price is right. It's free, but people are, particularly in an AI era, they are tuning into 6pm news, and you're completely right. More than 1 million people watching 7 News every night at 6pm, more than 1 million people watching 9 News at 6pm every night. Add in almost 1 million watching the ABC News. There's this great hunger for live quality news. But unfortunately, at the same time, there's been dramas behind the scenes at the major commercial networks. 7 hasn't been spared. We've seen 2 heads of news. It all comes amidst very drastic cost cutting. Last financial year, we saw some 150 staff get cut as they attempt to rein in the high costs of making television. And I mean, that's one of the factors that makes it probably an outlier in journalism. You look at radio, it's done for effectively the cost of a phone call to get someone on and interview them. Newspapers and online, you've just got to have a keyboard and type it, but the cost of making television is still exorbitantly high. And unfortunately, a lot of the ads that have traditionally supported that are going to online channels like YouTube and Meta, and the Australian commercial networks are finding it harder and harder to justify the high cost of making top-shelf first-class television.
You could argue that the 6pm news bulletins have always been a bit of a loss leader. You spent a huge amount of money on them, but they set your audience up for the night of viewing ahead. In this age of streaming, where people might not necessarily intend to stick with Network 7 or 9 all night, they're going to turn off and go to Netflix instead. Does that logic still work? Is that still what the TV news bulletins are for?
Yeah, well, I think it is obviously something that gets people in because you can't find that anywhere online. If you are driving home and you see a car crash or a fire or there's a roadblock, where are you going to find out what's actually happened? And that's the bread and butter of television news. You get home, you can put it on in the background while you're making dinner, which invariably most people still do because, you don't have to pay attention to all of it. You can tune in and out, but it is such a high quality and popular way for people to get a little news update as they're doing other things at home overnight. Does it necessarily translate to hanging on to people? No, probably not. But 9 has revealed still they are the number one channel amongst YouTube or any of the international streamers like Netflix when it comes to what people are still watching on their television. So obviously there is a case to be made. We'll get them in with the news, and then during that we'll flood them with ads for the great content coming up. Obviously, they are still hanging on to a lot of viewers, and that approach sort of justifies the continued existence of the news.
Do you think those fears among staff about continued cost cutting are going to come true? Are they going to try and just pare those bulletins right back over the next decade or so?
Is it going to come true? Yes. Is it going to be over the next decade? No, it's going to be over the next 12 to 24 months. And what we're going to see is greater nationalisation of the news bulletins. So we've lived in this great luxury where Brisbane has its own bulletin and Sydney has one and Melbourne and Perth and Adelaide, and it's really curated to local tastes. What we're going to see more is national news content filling up large swathes of the hour-long bulletins with only few or fewer local news stories. And particularly we're going to see that in regional areas where they're going to be hit with smaller newsrooms. Basically, the networks still have to pump out Australian content, just doesn't have to be state-based content.
Steve Jackson edits The Australian's Media Diary, and you can read it right now at theaustralian.com.au.